morning and welcome to our 9th annual Police Chaplains Conference. I'm Bryn Whittle, Senior Counsel to the Acting Attorney General and Community Engagement Director. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. You could be anywhere else, but you chose to be at the Police Chaplains Conference, and we thank you for that. We have a few housekeeping notes that I want to go over. In order to accommodate breakout rooms today, we are in meeting format. So that means that we will need everyone to be diligent to keep their mics turned off. Again, to mute your mics. We will have staff who will be asking you to mute throughout the program. And we ask you to do this out of the greatest respect for the dynamic presenters that we have assembled here today. So we want you to get the best experience out of this. And so again, we'll ask you to mute your microphones and be diligent about that. We also ask you to have patience today as we move through the program. Just like in person, sometimes there's hiccups online as well. And so we thank you in advance for your patience. We also want to thank our partners, because without them, we could not bring you this information each year. The partners, beside the Attorney General's office, we have the County Prosecutors Association of New Jersey, we have the New Jersey Chiefs of Police Organization, and we also have the Police Chaplain Program. So we are just thrilled again to be able to offer this to you. Unfortunately, we are online this year, but we're looking forward to bigger and better things for next year, which is our 10th anniversary. So without further ado, I want to present to you a man who needs no introduction. He is phenomenal. He is someone that most of you have met at some point in your chaplaincy endeavors. He is one of the leading voices throughout the state of New Jersey, and we are so glad to have him again participating as our moderator for the program. At this time, I present to you and I turn over the mic to our friend and colleague, Chaplain Gary Holden.
Thank you, Bryn. Good morning, everyone. Bryn, we thank you so much for everything you do to make this possible and the relationship that we've had the last number of years just putting this conference on. And we're glad we can do it again. And as Bryn said, hopefully for our 10th, we'll all be together in a different location where we can all enjoy one another. But today we're going to enjoy each other as we gather together. And we have some tremendous speakers here today and sessions that we're going to have together, and you'll be blessed and you'll learn some new things, I'm sure. So it's always my pleasure to be able to work with you all. And I know we have people here from other states as well that have jumped on, and we have quite a group that have decided to join us today for our conference. We're going to start with our Pledge of Allegiance. So if you, wherever you are, maybe you could stand to your feet. We'll be standing to our feet here, and we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Following the Pledge of Allegiance, we will have Ron Gonzalez, who is the lead police chaplain for Montclair Police Department here in New Jersey, and also pastor of Christ Church in Montclair and Rockaway. So let's pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ron?
Would you bow your hearts with me as we look to God in prayer? Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the gracious and precious gift of life. And we thank you right now for your goodness, your loving kindness, your tender mercies in our lives. We acknowledge right now that we need you. We need you in our lives. We need your strength. We need your wisdom. We need your guidance to be the men and women that you've called us to be. So we ask that you would come and be with us today. Bless this conference and every participant. and help us to learn from one another. Help us to grow during this time, to come to another level in all that we do, so that what we do will make a difference in the lives of all that we touch. And so we thank you for all these things, and we give you all the glory and honor for it. And we pray this in your precious holy name. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated, or you can stay standing wherever you are. It's up to you, but we're going to sit. And so we're going to begin our conference today with opening remarks from the Acting Attorney General, Matthew Platkin. We'll be hearing from Attorney General Platkin, and then the Cape May County Prosecutor Jeffrey Sutherland, who is the president of the New Jersey Prosecutors Association. And then from Sayreville Police Chief Zabrowski, who is the president of the New Jersey Association of Chiefs of Police. So we're going to hear from them at this time.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 9th Annual Police Chaplains Conference. I'm sorry that we could not be together in person this year, especially for my first year as Acting Attorney General. But you know very well the public safety challenges we face today, and as well as the trauma and the fear that reside in our communities because of them. From the onset of the global pandemic and the call for racial justice that still echoes throughout our nation, to the urgent need to strengthen trust in law enforcement, and the spate of bias and crimes and mass shootings that threaten our security every day, we've had to turn to and lean on the power of chaplaincy in more ways than one. We've had to come together to heal and work together to find solutions. And because of this collaboration between law enforcement and our communities, New Jersey has become a national leader in policing. We've focused on promoting a system of accountability and transparency and bolstering resources for law enforcement so that they're not only able to do their job, but that they can manage the stressors of their job. The Officer Resiliency Program is just one example of our efforts, and your support has helped make it effective. I'm glad that it is the lead-off topic for today's conference, especially after several tragic recent police suicides, which have left us heartbroken. In December of last year, we launched our crisis response pilot program called Arrive Together in Cumberland County. Arrive pairs a trooper with a certified mental health screener to respond to calls involving behavioral or mental health crises. So far, we've seen significant success, and now Arrive Together will expand to Elizabeth and Linden police departments. This will help bring us one step closer in our efforts to building that public trust and to ensuring continued excellence of New Jersey's law enforcement. Last month, I stood alongside Governor Murphy to announce our support for legislation that would create a statewide police licensing program. Our goal is simple: to hold law enforcement officers accountable in the same manner that we hold teachers, barbers, doctors, counselors, and lawyers accountable, as well as to have a system of checks and balances in place so that the honor and privilege of wearing a badge is never taken for granted. There's much more work left to be done, but I want to emphasize how valuable each of you is to New Jersey. You have become an instrumental partner to our office and to me personally. You've been a support system for our communities and a source of spiritual and emotional care for our officers. I recognize that the burdens you help us carry are heavy, so I hope that you're able to walk away from today's session on compassion, fatigue, and self-care, knowing that you too deserve support, and that an entire community stands behind you in the way that you stand behind them. I'd like to give thanks to Senior Counsel in our office and Director of Community Engagement, Bryn Whittle, for organizing the conference this year, as she does every year. And I would also like to thank each and every one of you chaplains here today for your service. And thank you as well to all of the law enforcement officers who serve alongside you.
Good morning. I'm Jeffrey Sutherland, Cape May County Prosecutor and President of the County Prosecutors Association of New Jersey, commonly known as CPANJ. On behalf of all CPANJ members across the 21 counties of New Jersey, congratulations on the 9th Annual Chaplains Conference. This annual convening and fellowship is an important testament to the growth and continued need for police chaplaincy at all levels of law enforcement. CPANJ continues to be a proud partner, and we look forward to returning to in-person conferences where we can once again join at the sessions throughout the day. Until that time, stay safe and be well.
Hello, I am Chief John Zabrowski, President of the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police. Thank you for the invitation and this opportunity to welcome you during the opening of your annual conference, albeit through a virtual platform. COVID has robbed us of so many opportunities over the last 2.5 years, particularly the opportunity to share this event in person. Policing as a whole is people-centric, and that's the same for the work that you do for us and those in need. We function in community, or more accurately, within a communal setting. Our jobs can't be done between glass panes, replaced by computer portals, nor performed easily at safe distances. To properly serve requires person-to-person contact to truly understand what is asked of us. That's the hallmark of community policing, and that's the mission of the Chaplains Association. Yet out of necessity, we've had to compromise and adapt and improvise during the pandemic as best we could, making good out of a bad situation. But without interruption, we've both continued to answer the call for service, provide updates and guidance as the pandemic raged, help those who were shuttered in and took out responsibilities that were critical for outreach when it was most needed. Over time, we've slowly resumed our pre-COVID opportunities, and hopefully that'll include resuming your conference as an in-person event next year. I certainly hope, as I'm anxiously awaiting that opportunity. Again, thank you for this invitation, and more importantly, thank you for all of your hard work, for your dedication, and your service to our communities and to our police officers.
Thank you very much, General and Prosecutor and Chief, for sharing with us today. We appreciate the partnership very much. We wouldn't have a police chaplain program if it wasn't for the partnership of these agencies, and we're all working together to do the job that needs to be done in our communities. And I think we've had great success in helping our fellow citizens and helping law enforcement in the job that they have to do. So we have some incredible sessions coming up today, and I want to introduce our speakers for our first session today. And our topic is officer resiliency and an update on that, and really how chaplains fit into that as well. And so we have the Chief Resilience Officer for the state of New Jersey, Dave Lenardus. Dave, most of you know Dave. Dave's been also the chaplain liaison for the Attorney General's office and is a great, great friend of chaplains and clergy. And we appreciate Dave very much in the work that he does. And he's taken on, amongst all his other tasks, being the Chief Resilience Officer for the Resiliency Program. And then we have the former Chief Resiliency Officer for the program, Rob Sepio, with us today. And Rob is now the CEO of Resilient Minds on the Front Lines, one of our new organizations that we partner together with the Police Chaplain Program. And Rob retired last June 1st. It's been a year, right, Rob? Yeah. Last June 1st. Yeah. And went with, the next day, went with Resilient Minds on the Front Lines. And so we'll be talking about police chaplaincy and resiliency, and the importance of chaplains receiving the resiliency training as well. And then we have Pastor Don Winsley. Don is the one of the police chaplains for the Voorhees Police Department, Cherry Hill Police Department, along with her husband, Ted, that you'll hear from later. And they are also the pastors of the Family Church in Voorhees. And so we're excited, and Don's been through the resiliency training and is excited about the resiliency program from a pastor or chaplain perspective. And we're just excited about having Don with us today. And so they're going to share just whatever they would like to share on this subject. And we're going to begin today with Dave Lenardus. Dave, great to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you for inviting me here today. This is my 9th annual Chaplains Conference that I participated in, and I'm honored to be here. I think as most of you know, I'm on my 2nd career. I retired from New Jersey State Police, did 30 years with them, and I'm on my 2nd career with the Office of the Attorney General, Division of Criminal Justice. One thing I can say is that I appreciate everything that chaplains do. You know, in my career with state police and carried right over into what I'm doing at the Attorney General's office, we rely on chaplains in so many different ways. They really fill the gaps that we have sometimes between law enforcement and the community, and have always been a tremendous resource. So I just want you to know I appreciate everything that you do as chaplains, and I thank you for it. I'm going to provide you with just a little bit of an overview on the Resiliency Program, which actually has been in existence for the past 2 years. And as you heard Attorney General Platkin talking about the recent number of suicides that we had, officer-involved suicides, both active and retired. Chaplaincy and resiliency is needed more now than ever. You know, in the past 2 months, we've had at least 7 suicides, active and retired members within New Jersey. And it's of, you know, grave concern, obviously. Where we are with the resiliency program, we have over 1,000 resiliency program officers trained in New Jersey. So there's one and several in every police department within the state. Their function, their job is twofold. One is to train every member of their department in the 2-day resiliency program by the end of this year. And then secondly, and importantly, to be able to be the eyes and ears for their department, to understand when one of the officers may be under a stressful situation, may have experienced trauma on the job, and to be able to have a sit down to see how that officer is doing, and to make referrals to counseling whenever necessary. So that's a really important role to have an in-house resiliency program officer on the scene. So I think, as most of you know, this resiliency program is tied very closely to cop. We need a 24/7 call line where if an officer is in crisis, in distress, needs somebody to talk to, immediately we're working with cop, and that's a 24/7 operation, as most of you know. We also have a resiliency line for resiliency officers that is part of cop. We actually fund that line at the Attorney General's office. And so that if a resiliency officer has somebody in crisis, they can call the resiliency line, get assistance. If they just need general information, they can call the resiliency line at cop to get assistance. And it works really well. I can tell you, just 2 weeks ago, I seen it in operation where a retired officer was in crisis, and it really saved them. The other thing that, that the resiliency program advocates is obviously employee assistance program that many and most departments have, to be able to utilize those. And we have other resources as well. If a officer doesn't want to go to cop, if they don't want to go to their own employee assistance program, if they need long-term care, we have all those resources that we can offer to any police officer throughout the state. So recently I briefed the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police on the resiliency program, as well as the county prosecutors, chiefs of detectives, and the new chiefs during their training session. And, I thank them for their support of the program, because it's really important that the powers to be within police organizations support it. If they support the program, if they encourage their personnel to get help, those members that need help will be more prone to do so. And I also thank them for the respecting the confidentiality of the program. Every resiliency officer takes an oath that everything that's said between them and an officer is confidential, with 2 exceptions. One, if the officer is telling his or her resiliency program officer that they were involved in a crime, or secondly, if they pose a potential threat to themselves or somebody else. But other than that, everything that's said is confidential. And as I said, I thank the chiefs for respecting that, because that's what's making the program work, the confidentiality. The fact that an officer can say can talk to somebody in confidence and know that it won't get back. Also, I talked to the chiefs about selecting credible folks to become new RPOs, Resiliency Program officers. You need to have an RPO for the rank and file, and you also need to have a separate RPO that your staff officers can feel comfortable talking to. And with that in mind, I'm happy to say that the Chiefs Association is actually exploring the concept of developing RPOs amongst the chiefs' ranks. They have a separate set of stressors than maybe the rank and file would. And normally, they would need to speak to one of their own to be able to, talk about whatever problems and stressors that they come across. So that's a promising sign as well. Also mentioned to the chiefs that when their officers are involved in a traumatic situation on the job, that they routinely, at the very least, have a sit down with the RPO. Or, under whatever the circumstances may be, if it's, traumatic enough that they actually see an employee assistance counselor, that it's done routinely so that officers don't feel like they're pointed, that they're being singled out. Also, when an officer is involved in internal investigation, at the very least, that's a stressful time for a police officer, to be able to have a sit down with an RPO, or some departments are already have their SOPs developed where an officer would sit down with an employee assistance counselor. So those are all positive things moving forward. We also have we developed a 2-hour block, an overview on resiliency that's part of the basic course for police officers. Every academy has to present it or present the entire 2-day training session, which some do, to the recruits. And interestingly enough, some of the recruits, actually when they're in the academy, will call cop to cop for assistance. We're developing a program for retirees, which I think is really important. You look at some of our retirees, they deal with stressors even after they leave the job. And as we've seen, many retirees, unfortunately, were victims of suicide. So this program, we're working in conjunction with the police unions to be able to prepare officers for retirement, to be able to, when an officer retires, to be able to have another retired RPO be somebody that they can reach out to and contact. Obviously, again, retirees would most likely prefer to talk to other retired members. And those several RPOs that are retiring, have retired, offered their assistance. So that's a great thing. Yeah. And lastly, we're collecting stats on the program, which is something that we're really required to do, but we need to do. We can see that, the program is definitely something that's needed. It's something that's been very progressive and very helpful for law enforcement, but we're collecting stats without any identifiers, individual officers, even without police departments. We're counting on each of the county primary master resiliency trainers to collect that data from their RPOs, and in turn, I will collect that data from them. So that data is needed not only to let us know how the program's doing, but to be able to apply for grants, which is so desperately needed right now to keep the program moving and growing. So that's where we are. And Gary, I thank you for the opportunity to allow me to give a briefing on it.
Absolutely, Dave. And thank you for the work that you do in so many different areas. And we are excited to see what's happening in the lives of the officers. And hopefully that will continue in the weeks that lie ahead. So thank you for all your good work. So now we're going to hear from Rob Sepio.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panelists and other distinguished guests in the audience. My name is Rob Sepio. I'm CEO of Resilient Minds on the Front Lines. And before I start talking about you and the necessity for resiliency, I did want to make one thing public, and that is, quite frankly, the work of Dave Lenardus. When I decided to retire, one of the crosses that I carried was who was going to take over the program, because this was a passion project by a lot of us with the Resiliency Program based upon suicide and how it affected us, and officers that are no longer with us that we all wish were here. I thought long and hard about who I would recommend to be the acting chief resiliency officer. And despite all of the duties that Dave has, and I used to supervise Dave as the deputy director, I was well aware of the 900 things that he does. I made it 901 for a reason, and that is because I wanted the program to succeed and carry forward and take the torch forward. So on behalf of this private citizen now, I do thank you for carrying that torch and carrying it with distinction and honor, and hearing you update where we are with the program. I remember when this was all theoretical and on a whiteboard somewhere as to what we wanted to do. And now actually seeing it being implemented on many different levels and actually doing it better than I did. Thank you, Dave, seriously, from one private citizen to you. Thank you for all you've done. And when I asked you to jump off a cliff for me and take this over, you said, absolutely, what's next? And so thank you. And everyone should know that with regards to Dave. And if you know Dave, you know why he was selected. But I want to talk about resiliency in you. And so I also am seated next to a good friend, Gary Holden. And when I retired, Gary wanted to merge our two groups together. For whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but Gary, we're now merged with Resilient Minds. And so we've taken over and worked with Gary with the Chaplains program and the basic Chaplains program. And we've been all over the state, and Gary continues to do that great work. But one of the things that we really wanted to do was actually really focus on resiliency for chaplains. And so in the room and in the panelists that will be speaking to you are individuals that have actually been trained in our resiliency course, from the Winsleys, the power couple Winsleys, to Ron Garcia, AKA Ron Gonzalez, Perry Masick, and obviously Gary. And the reason why is because we really wanted chaplains who understand the stresses of the many hats that you wear. We wanted chaplains to train chaplains on resiliency. Yeah. Because we all have trauma. And so 60 to 70% of you are visual. I'm an old trial lawyer. So, I recognize that you're going to remember what you see as opposed to what you hear from me. So I want you, everyone in the room, to think about this bag as representing your bag of trauma. Yeah. Whatever that trauma was. And by the way, that trauma isn't something that may not have happened yesterday or during the pandemic. When we talk about trauma and we really start to unlayer it and talk about it in our program, we start to explain to you, the concept of ACEs, those acute traumatic experiences that you may have experienced as a child. We talk to you about transgenerational trauma. Some of you may have heard the phrase, I am my father's son. And understanding that some of the lens and some of those activating events that you experience and that trauma that you carry with you, that bag that you carry with you, may go back as far back as your grandparents. Yeah. When we talk about the fact that this bag that you're carrying, the one thing, whether I'm talking to cops, whether we're talking to school teachers, whether we're talking to chaplains, whether we're talking to high schoolers, the one thing that they want not to happen is to take this bag and give it to the next generation, to give it to their children, to give it to their loved ones, that they actually are a little lighter. And we talk about that. We view all of you, and the reason why we wanted chaplains in the resiliency program is because of the unique role that you had and leadership roles that you have, both with the police departments and the community. When we initially talked to Gary about having chaplains being involved and being RPOs, that's why you were selected. You were selected also because of the unique privileges and confidentiality that come with being a cleric. And in another breakout session, I'll talk briefly about what the law is in that. But we also wanted you in this program because of the importance that you have. But who's taking care of you?
Yeah.
You're all experiencing all of that vicarious trauma when you're dealing with the police department, when you do a death notification, when you're dealing with members of the community. Who takes care of you? Who are you going to? We consider the RPOs as guardians of the guardians. We developed, and when I was with the AG's office, we highly endorsed a guardian mentality with law enforcement, a guardian mentality. In many ways, the RPOs are the guardians of the guardians, and you are guardians of the guardians and also the community that you serve and the many hats that you wear. Who takes care of you? And when we did this training, and we've done 2 of these trainings, we have another one coming up, I think, with Cumberland and Gloucester, right, Gary? It was amazing seeing the metamorphosis, because when we actually have our trainers go in, our first, I would say, 6 hours of the training, we don't train you. We actually get to know you. One of the questions that we ask, quite frankly, is what are your stressors at home, at work? What are those stressors? What are those traumatic experiences that you've had to deal with? And for some people, they've never had the opportunity to offload. Here's something else that we talk about in the training, and what you really need to be aware of. You're all wired like a cop. You're all wired like first responders. You're part of the first responder community. There's a reason why you went into this profession in the first place. It may have been a traumatic experience that you dealt with or overcame. You're also really, really good at trying to onboard everyone else's bags. And so learning actually to carve a little space for yourself, that it's okay for you to actually carve a little safe space for yourself and do the roles and the multiple roles that you do. And that's just as a chaplain, as a member of the clergy. We're not even talking about all your other duties and responsibilities as husband, wife, whatever the case may be. And so the resiliency program and what we specifically train for chaplains deals specifically with that. It's chaplains training other chaplains about resiliency. And quite frankly, this community in desperate need, in my estimation, in desperate need of this, getting the services that you need, because the statistics are very frightening. I know we have a panel dealing with compassion fatigue, and hopefully I'm not stepping over any stats that they may have compiled. But I was with Barry Vasquez and his event, and I saw this, and this is Barna is the site for this. And the presenter indicated that, and I haven't verified this, but the presenter indicated that, since the pandemic, 20,000 pastors, clergy member have left the clergy.
Yeah.
2 out of 5, 38% considered quitting. 50% would take another position in another profession if they had the opportunity or the means to do so. Those numbers are staggering. What has not been ever compiled, and I've talked to my friend John Taylor, both as the Chief Resiliency Officer and in my current capacity, what I have never seen is a study dealing specifically with the number of chaplains, unfortunately, we've lost, or clergy that we've lost to suicide. But those stresses are real. And so actually we've talked about in the resiliency program, and Dave, you've been instrumental with law enforcement, changing culture, but seriously looking from a chaplain standpoint and also changing culture within the clergy and the chaplaincy, that it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to get help, and it's also okay to carve out a little space for yourself. And that's what we talk about with our resiliency program. I know, Dawn, you went through the program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hijack the moderator position from Gary for a minute. Why don't you talk about your experiences, Dawn?
Good morning. I'm Pastor Don Winsley, and I had the privilege of taking the resiliency training. And like Rob said, when we got to the training, it wasn't about us learning how to deal with people just yet. It was, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to the people that are in the room. I want to give you an opportunity to share your stressors. And so, for a very large percentage of the time, which I've been through many trainings, but I've never been through a training where it focused on me as an individual, as a person, wanting to get into my boat and to really understand some of the things that I've gone through. And it was so personable. It was a very safe place. As we went around the room, even the presenters, when they were sharing with us, they sat in chairs and came to us individually. And so again, it really personalized the whole experience, and it helped us to first to unleash some of the things that were already on our hearts, and to hear some of the things in the room from clergy, from pastors. It was refreshing to know that, first of all, a place was created for us to be able to share those types of things. Because like Rob said, we're so used to always pouring out to other people. I mean, that is the nature of what we do. We're constantly, always making sure that everyone else is okay. And so the training, it really focused on us first, making sure that we're okay, so that we can now not pass on some of the stressors and some of the baggage that we have onto other people, but to learn how to deal with your stuff first, so that you can now you can share with other people from a healthy place. And it's alarming to me as a pastor to hear the statistics of clergy leaving, or getting fatigued, or suicide. When I hear pastors even falling into sin, it's like, wow, you didn't have somebody there for you. There was no one there, or you couldn't find someone to share some of the things that were on your heart. And so I love the fact that this program, it teaches us how to be there for someone else, but yet also you learning how to deal with the things that you've gone through as well. So in the church community, that's what we do. And then to see that this is something that can be taught, not just to clergy or police officers, but even in other professions. There are, medical doctors, there are attorneys, there are, people who are always dealing with things that they're taking on other people's, concerns, and hearing some of the things that are going on in their lives. And so I just love how this program, it deals with you on how to be resilient, how to bounce back, how to now be able to share and to really do it from a place of purity, from a healthy place. So, Rob, I'm very grateful. I'm a product of the class. There were light bulbs that were just going off. And even when I share in my circle of influence, or people, that are in my church or counseling, I'm just very mindful of mentors that are in my life that I can also, making sure that I'm sharing with them, so I can begin to release some things and not necessarily hold on, because I've been in counseling sessions, where it might be a husband and a wife, and listening to the husband that may have cheated on his wife, and, not one time, but there was a session we were in there, he did it 5 times. And so now I found myself taking on those convictions and being upset. And, my husband was like, okay, we can't take on, we have to be here for them. You have to, we have to release that. This is not, this isn't healthy for us to be able to counsel them and you feeling this way. So again, as pastors, we have to learn how to cast that off of us, so that we can, again, be there to help someone else. So again, we need that as pastors. And so I love the fact that we have a safe place that we can come and we can be trained on how to do that. So that's my experience. I could go on and on and on, because it's very refreshing to know that there's something for those individuals that need to be able to talk about things that are going on within their profession.
So Dawn, if I can ask, how did you feel coming out of the training as opposed to going into the training? And have you implemented any of the tools post-training?
Absolutely. I felt very empowered. I felt free. There were some things that I even had to kind of share, to let go of. And so it really caused me to be a little bit more focused when I'm actually in a environment where I have an opportunity to pour into someone, or to be more compassionate about listening to someone else's things that are going on with them, and being able to spot that a little bit sharper and clearer. In other words, there are people that are walking around that appear to be okay, and in fact, sometimes they're not okay. And so there are leaders within our church, high impact leaders. So to be able to recognize and going beyond the smile, going beyond what they're saying, because although they're saying I'm blessed by the best, wouldn't say nothing less. The fact is, you need to rest. Your soul, is struggling, is tired. And so being able to see past the smiles.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's a term that we actually use called intentional intrusiveness.
Yeah.
That all of you do for your flock, that we want you to do for yourself, and basically ask that additional question, right?
Mhm.
And the follow-up, when you ask someone, how are you doing? Actually be prepared to stop and listen.
Right.
And ask some follow-up questions as well when you get the normal fine.
Yeah.
Here's another one for us. We'll give you the code word that we're looking for. Good, right? How you doing? Good. For us, that means, okay, we're going to be intentionally intrusive and do some follow-up questions on that, because that's a dead giveaway that things may not necessarily be so good.
Well, in the Christian community, it's blessed.
Blessed, right? And so just an observation as well, having sat in, when our training is 3 days, and if you take the training, it's a 3-day training. Day one, when we start asking people to start sharing some of their stories, there was a heavy influence of scripture, correctly so. I mean, that forms the basis of your spirituality and the basis of your faith. When we asked the same questions day two, people started to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we want to get you, where it's okay for you to talk about
Be
yourself.
vulnerable.
I think the best quote I heard was, I necessarily don't want to let my employer down being God. That's a lot of stress. That's a ton of stress,
It's real.
right? So that may be incorporated in that. So again, it's literally just, we talk about reframing and rewiring and rethinking, reframing how you actually do things. One of the things that we talk about is how your brain loves patterns. So anyone on this call, if I placed you under certain stressors, your brain, because you're used to doing things a certain way, and because however your lens was formed, including traumatic experiences, you have certain go-tos that you go to, and your brain loves patterns. You go to that. What we talk about in the training, and we have 9 separate tools that we recommend individuals. What we talk about in the training is actually rewiring your brain. The scientific term is called neuroplasticity, but rewiring the brain so you actually walk a different path. And if you walk that path enough and it's a positive result and a positive way of doing things, then in fact, you've just created a new path that your brain will go to. So if you have if placed under certain stressors and observing certain things and activating events and what that is, and you're activated, for example, I took this drive for 12 straight years. I have to tell everyone I was activated as heck going through that tunnel today, because I've been away from this place for a year and retired for a year, right? And so it all comes flooding back to me in that process, but actually having sufficient tools to be able to deal with those activating events, and more importantly, have a different result. So that's what the program is about. And if you're interested, we want everyone to take this program. We think it's life-changing for you, for your quality of life and your family. You can reach out to Gary Holden, and Gary knows where all the trainings are and what we're doing with that. And the last point is, especially on behalf of Resilient Minds, I do thank Gary for the trust in actually merging our two 501c3s. It's been a labor of love for Gary, and so for Gary to select us has been our extreme honor. And so on behalf of Dee and Mike Pellegrino, the co-founders, I do want to publicly thank you for that.
You know, it's been a blessing, and it's only been a year, and we've been doing some tremendous things together. And we want to bring this resiliency program to all chaplains in New Jersey and other states. We are also going to be in other states. And so our goal is to be wherever we can be. We've done 2 already, and we have another one coming up, as was mentioned, in Gloucester County, Cumberland County, coming up next month. We do limit the numbers to 18 to 20 because of the nature of what we do. Rob, just tell us, when we do introductions, how long does it take just to do introductions?
For a class of 18 to 24, around 6 hours.
Yep.
And people are blown away when they hear that, but people just open up and they talk.
Mhm.
And so we always say, we're not on the clock, we're on the compass. We don't operate off the clock, we operate off the compass. And yet we accomplish what we need to accomplish in 3 days. So we'll keep you posted on the trainings that are coming. And I want to thank our panelists today who have been so involved with us and involved with resiliency here in New Jersey, with the New Jersey Resilience Program with Dave, and Rob now with Resilient Minds, and Don being involved with us. Don's one of our instructors now, along with her husband, Ted, that you'll hear from in a little bit. And so we're very excited about that. So as that note, Brent, we're going to move up the excellence in policing. Oh, we're going to do that now? Oh.
Ladies and
all
gentlemen, we call that an audible.
right. I go by what I'm told around here, you know, and that where it always works out the best.
Bryn just gave us an audible.
So anyways, we, I hope you see by now, we believe in this thing. In fact, we've had chaplains say to us, every clergy person in America ought to have this training. Everyone.
Absolutely.
Because this will change your life and your ministry. And that's, and we can do that. We want to do that. We were in Montclair doing this training a few months ago. And one of the chaplains who's a pastor said, really all my people in my congregation ought to have this training. So I don't know how we would do all that, but we have a lot of instructors now, and we hope to add more around the country, all over the country. We have teams going out all over the country. So we're excited about this, and we hope eventually every one of you will be able to avail yourself of the 3-day resiliency training. Panelists, thank you very much. Appreciate your sharing today. So now we have the Excellence in Policing Award, which was given out how many weeks ago now? Yeah, for 2021, but it was just given out at the end of 2021, I believe. So the Attorney General's office has what is called the Excellence in Policing Awards. They have a number of different awards that they give out. And one of those now, and this is the second year that this award has been given out, is the Chaplain of the Year. And I would like to announce, and it was already announced to our law enforcement, but many of you may not have heard, I would like to announce to you the Excellence in Policing Award Chaplain of the Year, who happens to be with us today, and you're going to hear from him later, right, John? We're going to hear from John later. And that is Pastor Reverend John Taylor, who is with the Capital City Community Coalition here in Trenton, where we are right now, and also the head or lead chaplain for the New Jersey State Police. And John and I have been friends for many years, and we served together in the New Jersey State Police, and he's been a tremendous asset to chaplaincy and the work that he does, but not only that, here in the community as well. So we want to make that special announcement today and honor John. And the award's already been given out to him, and I don't know what that award is. He already has it probably in his office someplace, but we wanted to just make that announcement to all of you today. Our thanks to John Taylor. Next year, right, there'll be another one, Lord willing. And it may be you, you never know.
With law enforcement, as a pastor, as a person, as an African-American male in America, to me was very important because most of the time in our communities, it was always friction. If you don't work at it, and you don't dialogue and talk to each other and challenge each other, but things that never change. Being the chief chaplain, and chief chaplain, the first African-American chief chaplain in the history of the state police in 100 years. We're breaking barriers, but we're trying to make sure that it's inclusive of all of our brothers and sisters, whatever their interfaith community is, of 22 of us that have the responsibility of covering the state. So if the interfaith community and the community is engaged together, then we can produce the right people in law enforcement, the right people in society, the right teachers, meaning what? They have high morals. So let's do our best. Let's make humanity better. Let's continue to engage our young people. They have a lot of pressure that they're under, a strange world that they're coming up in. So they need us there to be a positive influence. Let's do it. God bless you.
Our last session before closing remarks today will be with Rob Sepio, who you heard before. And Rob, being an attorney and being here in the Attorney General's office for many years and prosecutor's office, and still involved in certainly what he does in those areas, we wanted to, even though we have a class in our basic training on confidentiality, we wanted to kind of expand it out more and hear from the law perspective on our parameters as chaplains and clergy. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob at this time to share with us his thoughts.
Thank you, Gary. So I'm going to be talking from what I normally do, the lawyer side of my brain. So you get the tale of two cities with Rob Sepio here today. We're going to talk specifically about privileged communications, and wanted to get into a little bit more detail about the status of the law and specifically the rules of evidence. So I'm going to lawyer this up. I'm going to apologize in advance for lawyering it up, but really going over a rule of evidence that when we do this with the basic chaplains course, we always get questions about what is the scope of confidentiality, who has the privilege, and what does that privilege look like? So specifically, we're talking about Rule 511 in the New Jersey Rules of Evidence, Rule 511 in the New Jersey Rule of Evidence, and that is basically the Cleric Pertinent privilege. And basically, this was a rule that was amended in 1994. Prior to 1947, actually, there was no equivalent privilege in New Jersey. This rule of evidence was actually put in and amended from the 1981 rule to give us the modern rule as to what that privilege is. And that privilege covers any communication made in confidence to a cleric or spiritual advisor in the course of discipline or practice of a religious body for which the cleric belonged. If we have such a communication to a cleric or a spiritual advisor in the course of the discipline of that spiritual advisor and religious body, that information is privileged. And so it's important for us to understand that's the scope of the privilege. The next is, okay, well, who does it cover and who has the privilege? And in New Jersey, this is one rule, for example, this rule itself, where the privilege actually covers more than the attorney-client privilege. It was designed to mirror the attorney-client privilege. But in this one aspect of it, it's actually more expansive than the attorney-client privilege. And that is this: when can it be waived? So the privilege can be waived when either both parties, meaning you as the cleric, you as the clergy person have the privilege, or the person who made the statement can waive, or the person who made the statement can waive as well. So two individuals, the first way in which a waiver can happen is you and the person who made the statement can waive the privilege. The second, and this is where it's a little different than the attorney-client privilege as well, is the privileged communication, because it's yours as well, can be waived by you, when that communication pertains to future, let me stress again, future, one more time, just in case, because we're getting close to lunch, future criminal acts, future criminal acts, not past criminal acts, future criminal acts. Now, this is a little broader than the attorney-client privilege. But again, those future criminal acts is when that second waiver provision can kick in, and that's when you can waive. Note, the way in which the law says is, in the rules of evidence, you're not required. Meaning, even when we have a future criminal act, the privilege is yours. Yours to consider, yours to waive. And that is the court rules and the case law interpreting this rule was very robust as to why this rule of evidence was written this way. So those are really important concepts that we need to understand. And now we layer on the police chaplain program, and the police chaplain program, where specifically you have multiple hats and dual roles, one being a police chaplain. And I know Gary, when the course is taught, has a model contract, if you would, for individuals to sign and entities to sign. And the other is when you are playing your role as a cleric for the community. And so there's a couple other things that we need to understand as to how a cleric is defined. Under this rule, it is really broad as to how it's defined. The case called In Re Murtha, which basically indicated basically has to be an individual who is authorized to perform the religious function. So, for example, Rob Sepio, I'm not a deacon. Rob Sepio, I am not a minister. I have not gone to any specialized school or training. I cannot assert this privilege claiming to be a cleric if I'm not authorized to do so. I haven't gone through some specialized training. You have to go through that kind of training in order to assert the privilege. There is a case called In Re Martha, and In Re Martha was actually a case dealing with a Catholic school nun who was part of the teaching order. She had conversations with an individual where it became more of a counseling session, and the issue became whether or not the privilege attached. In that case, because she did not have that authority, she did not have the power to counsel pursuant to the rules of the church, the court held that it was not privileged. She was not acting as a member of the cleric. So general rule, very broad, but there has to be some rules, some parameters put in place for the cleric to apply. Let's talk about the scope. What is the scope of this rule? Well, in the scope of the rule was extended in 1981 to cover a lot of the things that clerics and clergy and chaplains are now asked to do. For example, clergy as a counselor. So in 1981 and 1994 specifically, when there was amendments to the rule of evidence, it extended to those duties that you have. So family sessions, individual sessions, group sessions that you may have all fall under this definition or scope of the rule, meaning disclosures that are made during these sessions fall under this privilege and fall under that privilege specifically. The next question we have to ask is, okay, how do the courts actually look to determine whether or not someone believes the privilege exists? And what the court has held is they've adopted an objectively reasonable person. Put it this way: would an objectively reasonable person, based upon the circumstances, believe that the information was privileged, that they were talking to a cleric in the capacity of their role and therefore confidential and privileged? The court looks like at different things. It's just not whether this individual thought. That would be a subjective test. It's an objective test. Would a reasonably prudent person, based upon similar circumstances, believe that he or she was talking to you in your capacity as a minister, as a cleric, as a member of the cloth? That's what the courts look at to make a determination whether or not the privilege can be waived, whether or not information or can be testified to or evidence. It is very broad. The case is called State versus JG. In State versus JG, this was a criminal case. This was a 2010 New Jersey Supreme Court case. The court held it was objectively reasonable in that situation to believe the communication was in confidence. And this is where it's really important for you as members of the clergy, as members of the chaplains, to understand your role. In this case, the pastor reached out to a congregant when it was disclosed to him from a family member that it was alleged that he was sexually assaulting his children. In this case, the pastor reached out to this individual as the pastor of the church, spoke to the individual, at which point admissions were made. The collateral consequences, because the court looked at the three-pronged test and made a determination, that admission was inadmissible because of the fact that the individual objectively and reasonably believed, and the court found an objective, reasonable belief that this individual spoke and believed that the privilege attached. And so these are really important lines that you need to understand, obviously, which is, for example, dovetails when we train young detectives and line officers. When there's an allegation of a sexual assault, we don't want them speaking too much to the victim or individuals. The reason being is because those types of cases are really, really specialized and require really specialized training. As a cleric, this is one of those things as well, where unintentionally what could occur is evidence may be suppressed if you don't understand the confines of the rule. In the police chaplain program, Gary has both hats. He has pastor hat and he has the chaplain hat, and the necessity to tell someone in what capacity you're speaking to them. And the reason why Gary does that is case law, and the case specifically as to pastor hat or chaplain hat. And when you're talking to someone, what role you're playing is called State versus Carey. Now, State versus Carey was an appellate division case in 2000. In this case, this was a police officer who was also a Baptist deacon. So police officer, Baptist deacon, speaks to individual makes admissions. The question becomes, are those admissions admissible, or does the privilege attach? In that case, the court held, because the officer indicated he was speaking to this person as a police officer, not as a deacon, and made that clear that he was speaking to him as a police officer, those statements were admissible and the privilege did not apply. This becomes important for you and with regards to what role you're playing, because of the multiple hats that you have within your congregation and police chaplain as well. And this is the reason why Gary talks about in the training and the police chaplain training, how we really want to advise the individual who we're speaking to, including, by the way, the police officers that you may be ministering to, what role you're wearing, what hat you're wearing at that point, and making sure that it doesn't bleed over or cross over for this reason and for the status of the law. So I know Gary wanted to talk a little bit specifically about doing a little bit more deeper dive into Rule 511 than we normally do in the police chaplain program. Hopefully this provides more context to you and the reasons why, and more importantly, provide you some guidance as to where the lines are. Again, this privilege is yours. If there is a future criminal act, you may, but are not required to waive the privilege. That choice becomes yours when the party doesn't consent to the release of the privilege pursuant to a waiver.
So thank you, Rob. So it's very important that we remember what role we play. And again, as Rob mentioned, that's why we share that in our very first class in basic training, where we actually bring out the pastor clergy cap that we wear and the chaplain one to make sure we know what the parameters are. Threat to harm yourself or somebody else, as we mentioned in the resiliency program, that is reportable. We need to report that.
Yeah, the privilege is yours, though. It says any crime. So that can be a violent crime.
Yes.
That could be a property crime. Any crime is yours to make that determination. I'll put on my former hat. From a law enforcement perspective, of course, we would want a report, but we cannot compel you to report in that instance based upon the rules of evidence.
Well, this has been, in a short period of time, very thorough, and I appreciate that, Rob. And you had your law book out there and it's all highlighted. So if you have any more questions, call Rob after midnight tonight and he'll answer those questions for you. Although he does give out his cell phone number, like we all give out our cell phone numbers as well. But we wanted to give you a little bit more on this because we do cover the highlights of that in the basic course, but we wanted to expand it out a little bit more, and Rob's a good one to be able to do that.
And if you don't like what I said, my name is Dave Lenardus, Leondardis. I'm looking at Mr. Lenardus now.
Yeah.
So light up his phone.
Thank you. And thank you, Rob. We're going to share just some closing thoughts here, a moment of reflection, we call it. Bryn's going to come back up in a little bit and share some closing remarks as well. And I call this a little bit of a challenge, and I like to share this at the end just to challenge us as clergy, but especially as chaplains, to realize, and I think you see the theme of what we've been talking about today, and with all the things that we go through in light of COVID, in light of all the crisis going on out there in the world today, that we certainly need each other. And I'm so grateful that we have formed this really incredible group of chaplains here in New Jersey. Yes, but some of you that are on from other states also have formed this, and chaplains from all over the country that are really helping each other. And one thing we can do with Zoom and networking, we can do more of this, and through phone calls. I know I have chaplains call me almost every week with something that they want to just talk about. And I'm sure you do that with each other. So we all need each other. But let me just say that I want to share some closing remarks from Winnie the Pooh, from the wisdom of Winnie the Pooh, and one of the little stories involved with that. So Pooh said, "Today was a difficult day." And there was a pause. "Do you want to talk about it?" asked Piglet. "No," said Pooh after a bit. "No, I don't think so." "Well, that's okay," said Piglet. And he came and sat beside his friend. "What are you doing?" asked Pooh. "Nothing really," said Piglet. "Only I know what difficult days are like. I quite often don't feel like talking about it on my difficult days either." "But goodness," continued Piglet, "difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got someone there for you. And I'll always be there for you, Pooh." And as Pooh sat there, working through in his head his difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him, quietly swinging his little legs, he thought that his best friend had never been more right. So simple, isn't it? Sometimes we make things so difficult, but it's really not difficult when we recognize that we have others there for us. And I think what happens with clergy that have unfortunately taken their lives, law enforcement that have unfortunately taken their lives even this year, or those who leave the ministry or leave their position because they're what we call burned out. They just struggle with whatever is going on, and they don't know where to turn, to realize there's usually somebody there for them. They just forget there's somebody there for them. So it's a challenging time right now, continues to be a challenging time. One of my pastor friends, I just heard that he was down with COVID for the last 10 days, and now he's started to come back. So it's still out there, and all the things that go on out there in our world, and we understand that as clergy. But what a blessing to know that we can call on each other, our fellow chaplains. You can call on me. You have my cell phone number. Anybody that's been in this class today, you can call on them. We're here for each other within your department, within your chaplain team. And I hope you have a chaplain team. We do have our own piglets sitting right beside us. And let's not forget that. So I just want to leave that challenge with you today. Whatever you're going through, it doesn't have to be chaplaincy. In your family, in your life, in your ministry, we're here together. And when we gather together in resiliency, man, we share those things. It's absolutely incredible what we share, how we become transparent and we open up. And sometimes as clergy and as chaplains, we're not transparent enough. We don't open up and share our heart like we should. So we create that avenue in the resiliency training. We create that opportunity for you to open up and share what's going on, what the stresses are you have, and not be afraid to do that in an environment where it's not going to get out to anybody else. And then we grow from that. And Don mentioned that, the impact that made in her life and all the others that are here as well. So I want to thank you from my perspective for a great morning. And Lord willing, next year we'll be together, and Bryn's coming. Next year we'll be together at our 10th anniversary, all together someplace, right, Bryn? We don't know where yet, but all together someplace.
Yes. So join me with a resounding applause. You can't hear it, but we want to applaud, Chaplain Holden. He just, his words were just affirming and just encouraging, inspiring, because we have been through a lot over the past couple of years, but we continue to press forward. And that's why, again, I love this gathering each year because of all of you. So on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General, I just want to again thank our partners, the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police, County Prosecutors Association of New Jersey, and the Police Chaplain Program / Resilient Minds for your participation, your support, and just seeing us through. Because again, you are extremely important to the work that we do as a law enforcement agency. And I think I speak for all of the law enforcement agencies across the state. And again, we do want to do something quite special next year to really just celebrate each other and celebrate chaplaincy and how it's rooted and grounded in New Jersey. And so with that being said, I want to also thank all of our presenters who are tried and true. Of course, our moderator and presenter, Chaplain Gary Holden. I also want to thank Pastor Ron Gonzalez, Dave Lenardus, who is with our Division of Criminal Justice, Pastors Don and Ted Winsley, Reverend John R. Taylor. And I also want to thank Chaplain Perry Messick, bringing up the end there, and Rob Sepio, who we miss dearly, but we know that he is with us on this journey. So I just want to thank all of them for, taking the time out today, joining us at the Hughes Complex to meet together and to put this production on. I also want to thank our OAG communications team, who's been behind the scenes, and my assistant, Michelle, who you received emails from just for your behind the scenes work, because without you, we could not get this done. So again, thank you so much and have a blessed day, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you, Bryn. Let's give Bryn a round of applause. Thank you so much.
That concludes our conference for this year.